What are you doing here? That was the question that left my lips before I even realized I was speaking, the words sharp against the hushed stillness of the early morning. It was barely dawn, and the neighborhood was still swaddled in silence, with only a pale veil of mist clinging to the narrow street as I made my way toward the garbage collection point. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and yesterday's rain, and the usual chirping of birds had not yet broken through the gray quiet. I should have been alone, just a widow in her 60s, rising too early, dragging a small plastic bag of kitchen scraps to the curb. But instead, I saw a figure crouched low in the half-light, rummaging with frantic hands through the neatly stacked trash. My first thought was of the stories the neighbors had whispered recently, of bags torn open, waste scattered across the pavement, of some unseen creature, perhaps a stray dog or a desperate crow. But this shadow was neither animal nor bird. The way it moved was too deliberate, too human, and the unease that coiled in my stomach urged me to pause in my steps, to watch a little longer before deciding what to do. The shadow resolved itself slowly as I crept closer, my heart beating harder with each hesitant step. It wasn't tall. In fact, it was shockingly small. A child. My breath caught when I finally realized what I was seeing. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, crouched among the bags, her fingers blackened with grime as she tore through plastic and paper. She pulled out a hunk of bread so stale it crumbled at the edges, dotted with green mold, and without hesitation she stuffed it into her mouth. She chewed with a single-minded ferocity, crumbs falling onto her filthy shirt, eyes darting as though expecting someone to snatch it away. It was not the kind of eating done for pleasure, but for survival. I felt my throat constrict. Children should never look like this. They should be at home, tucked safely in bed, their bellies full, their faces washed, their dreams untouched by the harshness of the world. Yet here she was, this fragile little thing, devouring garbage in the misty dawn. I called out again, louder this time, though even as the words echoed, I wasn't sure if I wanted her to hear me. "What are you doing here?" The child froze. Her shoulders trembled as though struck, and she turned her head slowly, as if afraid of what she might see. When her eyes met mine, everything inside me stilled, because I knew that face. Despite the dirt smeared across her cheeks, despite the tangled hair and hollowed eyes, despite the fear that radiated from her tiny frame, I recognized her. Those eyes, those lips, the shape of her chin, that child was Blair, my granddaughter, the little girl who had disappeared 2 years ago and whom everyone, including myself, had believed dead. I can still remember that day with the kind of clarity that gnaws at you even years later, the kind of memory you cannot shake off no matter how much you wish you could. Back then, I was already living my quiet life as a widow, my days stretched thin with silence since the passing of my husband, a dedicated police officer whose absence had left the house hollow. I had raised my son Tim into a man, watched him build his own family, and though the loneliness lingered, I filled it with the joy of being a grandmother. Blair was my first grandchild, followed later by little Sebastian, and they brought light back into my life. Tim's wife, Sandra, came from a world very different from ours. She was the daughter of wealthy business people who owned several properties across the city. She had grown up pampered, accustomed to luxury, and even into her 30s, she leaned on her parents for help in ways that never quite sat right with me. Still, she was beautiful and well-mannered, and she adored my son. Or at least, that was what it looked like from the outside. Together, they seemed like a perfect young family, living in a spacious home not far from me, their lives carefully balanced between the two sets of grandparents. We often visited each other, our families mingling over meals, birthdays, and the small, ordinary occasions that knit relatives together. From anyone's perspective, theirs was an exemplary household, harmonious and full of promise. But perfection has cracks, even if they are hidden. Sandra was always a little different. Her attitude, one of someone who expected the world to accommodate her whims. She had grown up never knowing true struggle, never being denied what she desired. That kind of upbringing leaves its mark, subtle but dangerous. I remember small moments, little comments or gestures that unsettled me. When we went to Blair's kindergarten field trip, for instance, Sandra was glued to Sebastian, barely acknowledging Blair even as the little girl looked on with lonely eyes. Sandra claimed it was because Sebastian was younger and more demanding, but I could see Blair's quiet sadness. My son, bless him, took vacation days to participate, determined to ease his wife's burden, but the imbalance was still there. I told myself these were small matters, things that did not warrant interference. Families adapt, I thought. People grow. It wasn't my place to meddle. How naive I was. Everything shattered during that summer when Blair was 4 years old. Tim and Sandra had decided to take the children camping, a wholesome family outing, the kind that fills albums with happy photos and leaves everyone with stories to tell years later. They left full of laughter, their car packed with supplies. But sometime during that trip, in a moment so brief and ordinary it should have meant nothing, they took their eyes off Blair. And when they looked again, she was gone. The panic that followed was immediate and consuming. Tim and Sandra searched the campsite, calling her name until their voices broke. Other campers joined in. The police were called. I rushed to the site as soon as I heard, and so did Sandra's parents. Together we scoured the area, shouting until our throats were raw. Volunteers joined, and soon the search swelled into a massive effort with media coverage and flashing headlines. The story of a missing child grips everyone. It could happen to any family after all, and Blair's sweet face was soon everywhere. But fate is cruel. The very next day, a typhoon struck, its rains lashing the mountains and swelling the nearby river until it raged like a living beast. The search became nearly impossible under sheets of water and dangerous winds. We tried anyway, clinging to hope. 3 days later, downriver, they found a shoe and some small belongings that were identified as Blair's. The authorities told us what we didn't want to hear. With the river swollen, its currents merciless, it was all but certain she had been swept away. The search was called off. We grieved as a family, broken and hollow. Tim clung to his wife, but Sandra was the one who never accepted the conclusion. She insisted Blair was alive, begged everyone, police, volunteers, even strangers, to keep searching. "I'll pay," she cried. "I'll pay whatever it takes. Just keep looking." Her desperation was pitiful, but it was also unbearable, because in our hearts we believed the truth. Blair was gone. Children do not survive long in such conditions. We told ourselves it was kinder to let go, to accept, but Sandra would not. Her grief turned inward. She stopped eating, stopped speaking. She cut herself off from the world, lashing out, blaming herself, collapsing into despair so deep it frightened us. "It's my fault," she would whisper, rocking herself. "It's all my fault." My son and I tried to support her, tried to remind her that she still had Sebastian, that she had to live for him. Slowly, painfully, after nearly 2 years, Sandra began to return to something like normalcy. She smiled again, at least on the surface, though her eyes carried a shadow that never left. But as she healed, something else emerged. Sandra began pouring everything she had into Sebastian. Every whim he had, she indulged. Every toy, every request, every passing desire. She granted it instantly, often with money from her parents. "He wants it now," she would say, brushing aside Tim's protests. "What if tomorrow never comes?" To her, Sebastian was a fragile treasure she could not risk losing, and so she gave him everything, smothering him with indulgence. And he, still a child, grew spoiled, his manners dissolving, his respect slipping away. He stopped listening to his father, to his grandparents, even to his mother at times. He became the center of Sandra's world, while the rest of us watched helplessly, unwilling to confront her too harshly after the tragedy. And all the while, I carried my own quiet unease. Something felt wrong. I could not name it then, not fully, but it gnawed at me. I told myself it was grief, that families change after loss. I never imagined the truth. Because the truth was that Blair was still alive. And one misty morning, at a garbage dump not far from my own home, I came face to face with her, my lost granddaughter, crouched among the trash, her body frail, her eyes hollow, her stomach empty. My voice trembled as I whispered her name, hardly believing my own eyes. Blair. Is it really you? The child's lips moved slowly, almost uncertain, as though she had forgotten how to answer such a question. And then, in a voice that carried both fear and relief, she nodded. Yes, I'm Blair. The moment the confirmation fell from her mouth, my knees weakened. For 2 years we had grieved her as dead, buried her in our hearts, convinced ourselves she had been lost to the river's merciless current. Yet here she was, alive, frail, trembling, dirty, beyond recognition, but alive. My hands shook as I reached for her, afraid that if I touched her too quickly she might vanish again, a mirage conjured by loneliness and guilt. But when my palm brushed her tangled hair, when she flinched but did not disappear, I knew the impossible had become real. What followed felt like a blur, though every detail has since etched itself into my memory with painful clarity. I led her gently away from the garbage heap, coaxing her with promises of food and safety. At first, she resisted, her small hands raised defensively, repeating, I'm sorry, as though expecting punishment. It broke me to hear such words from a child so young. I hushed her, whispered that I wasn't angry, that everything was all right now. Step by step, like coaxing a frightened animal out of hiding, I managed to guide her back to my home. And once the door closed behind us, once I sat her down at my kitchen table and placed warm food before her, the dam of my composure nearly broke. She ate slowly at first, suspicious, glancing up at me between bites as though uncertain if this was a trick. Then hunger overcame caution, and she devoured everything with desperate intensity. Only after she had eaten, after she had taken a warm shower and I had dressed her in clothes from my storage chest, did the full horror of her condition reveal itself. Under the dirt and grime, her little body was littered with bruises and marks, faded welts across her arms, the faint imprints of fingers pressed cruelly into her skin, scratches that had healed without care. My breath hitched as I tried to remain calm, smoothing her hair, smiling as though nothing were wrong, but inside I was screaming. This was not the body of a child who had been cared for. This was the body of a child who had been tormented. Yet even amid the evidence of abuse, there was something strangely incongruous. Blair, though frail and undersized for her age, displayed a level of learning and manners unusual for a child left to fend for herself. She knew how to hold utensils properly, how to say thank you softly when handed something. When I placed a book before her, half expecting confusion, she began reading aloud in halting but clear words. She could count, write her name, even perform simple arithmetic. Someone had been teaching her, shaping her, maintaining some illusion of education. It was both a relief and a terror. Relief, because it meant she had not been entirely abandoned. Terror, because it meant she had been under someone's control, someone deliberate, someone who wanted to mold her for reasons I could not yet fathom. The enormity of it all pressed down on me until I felt suffocated. What was I supposed to do now? How could I, a woman past my prime, possibly shoulder a secret of this magnitude? There were legal implications, criminal shadows lurking behind the truth. Someone had stolen Blair from us, hidden her away for 2 years, hurt her, starved her, and yet also ensured she learned enough to function. This was not the random cruelty of nature. It was the cold design of a person. I did the only thing I could think of. I called my son. The phone rang harshly in the early morning quiet, and when Tim's groggy voice finally answered, his confusion was palpable. "Mom? Why are you calling at 6 in the morning?" His tone shifted quickly as I told him the news, his words tumbling out, tinged with irritation and disbelief. "Blair? Mom, what are you talking about? Blair's gone. You know that. We only have Sebastian now. Please get a hold of yourself." I bit back tears, insisting I would never joke about something so cruel. "Just come to the house," I begged. "Please. You'll see with your own eyes my voice must have carried such conviction, such urgency, that he relented despite his disbelief. Within the hour, my son arrived, and the moment he stepped inside and saw his daughter sitting there, alive, nervous, clutching the hem of her borrowed dress, his face drained of color. "Dad?" Blair whispered hesitantly, and that single word shattered him. He fell to his knees, tears brimming in his eyes as he reached out to hold her. "Blair, is it really you? My sweet girl?" The reunion was both heartbreaking and beautiful, father and daughter clinging to each other after years of separation. Yet beneath the joy lay a gnawing dread. For if Blair had survived, then where had she been? Who had kept her all this time? And why had she been forced to live like this? Tim's questions came quickly, tumbling one over another, but Blair's answers were halting, fragmented. She shook her head at some, whispered partial truths at others. Slowly, painfully, a picture began to emerge, though it was one we could scarcely bear to believe. She had not been swept away by the river. She had not been lost to the wilderness. She had been taken, hidden, kept alive, yes, but not in love or safety. She had lived in a place that was dark and secretive, where she was taught strange lessons and told that her existence was conditional, dependent on her usefulness. And she spoke of her mother in ways that chilled us, of commands, of punishments, of working hard so that Mom would smile again. The realization clawed at us both. Could it be? Could Sandra, the woman who had wept and wasted away in grief, the woman whose parents had poured resources into finding their granddaughter, the woman who had indulged Sebastian beyond measure, could she have been behind this all along? I wanted to reject the thought. It was too monstrous, too unthinkable. A mother harming her own child? Yet as Blair spoke, as her small, trembling voice recounted fragments of her hidden life, the truth grew undeniable. Sandra had orchestrated it. She had been the shadow lurking behind Blair's disappearance, the reason we had all been deceived. From that moment, everything changed. Tim and I knew we could not act recklessly. If Sandra discovered that Blair had returned, she might lash out again, perhaps even try to finish what she started. We needed to be careful, deliberate. So we made arrangements, whispering late at night, planning while pretending life continued as normal. Blair was entrusted to people we could trust absolutely. Retired police officers, close friends of my late husband, men of integrity and experience who agreed to watch over her in secret until we could ensure her safety. Meanwhile, Tim and I maintained our routines, wearing masks of normalcy so that Sandra would suspect nothing. Those days were torturous, each moment heavy with tension. At breakfast, I would watch Sandra chatting with neighbors, smiling as though she carried no burden, and bile would rise in my throat. I longed to confront her, to scream at her for the 2 years she had stolen, for the bruises on Blair's body, for the fear in her eyes. But we had to wait. We needed proof, undeniable evidence that would ensure she faced justice. Otherwise, she might twist the story, cast doubts, and somehow escape punishment. It was on the 5th morning after Blair's rescue that Tim called me, his voice low and urgent. "Mom, I found out where she's keeping everything. I know where to go." My heart seized, torn between fear and determination. "Then we go together," I said. "No arguments." He tried to dissuade me, worried for my safety, but I would not back down. This was my granddaughter's life. This was justice. We drove together, hearts pounding, until we reached the outskirts of the city. There, nestled among trees and hidden from casual view, was a villa owned by Sandra's parents. I remembered hearing them speak of it once, dismissing it as a property in poor condition, difficult to rent or sell. But now, as we approached the quiet structure, my unease solidified into certainty. This was the place where Blair had been kept, where her childhood had been stolen. The garage door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling out like a wound in the bright morning. From within, we heard it, the metallic scrape of something being dragged, an eerie sound that echoed in the enclosed space. My son's jaw tightened. "She's here," he whispered. We stepped inside, the dimness swallowing us, and then, from the shadows, a flashlight beam cut through the dark, blinding us for a moment. A voice followed, calm yet sharp. "Mother-in-law? Tim, why are you here?" The figure stepped forward, and there she was, Sandra. Our suspicions had been confirmed. She stood there, her face half lit, a metal bat gripped in one hand, her expression oddly composed, even smiling, though her eyes betrayed something unhinged. The moment our gazes locked, I felt a chill run down my spine. The confrontation had begun. The beam of her flashlight lingered on us, blinding for a heartbeat before sweeping away, leaving behind the dim glow of a bulb flickering from the rafters above. The cavernous garage seemed even larger in its shadows, its concrete walls damp, smelling faintly of mold and rust. Metal shelves lined the sides, cluttered with boxes and tools. But my eyes were drawn to Sandra herself, standing there with the bat in her hand, like a queen holding court, her posture unnervingly relaxed. Her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes, a smile that felt like a knife pressed delicately against the skin. "I should have known you would come poking around," she said, her voice calm, almost teasing. "Curiosity is such a dangerous thing." My son stood frozen for a second, the sight of his wife like a wound reopening. He had loved her, trusted her, built a life with her. Now he saw her standing in the very place where she had hidden their daughter, a weapon clutched casually in her hand. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides, but his voice, when it came, was steady, almost eerily so. "Where is she, Sandra?" he demanded. "Where did you keep her? What did you do to our little girl?" Sandra tilted her head, feigning innocence, her long hair spilling over one shoulder as she tapped the bat lightly against the floor, the sound ringing like a judge's gavel. "Your little girl?" she repeated slowly, as though tasting the words. Funny, because for 2 years, she wasn't yours at all. She was mine. Mine to shape, mine to mold, mine to decide whether she deserved to live or not. She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing, her voice dropping into something sharper. "You think parenthood is about loving them, about indulging them. But no, parenthood is about control. It's about bending them into what they're supposed to be." Blair was weak, too soft, too much like you. She gestured at me with a curl of contempt, all sentiment and frailty. I couldn't stand to watch her grow into another failure. The words sliced through me, and for a moment I could hardly breathe. This was no longer suspicion. It was confession, raw and unapologetic. I felt my heart thunder in my chest, fear and rage battling inside me, yet I stayed silent, watching, knowing that sometimes words spoken freely in arrogance become the very rope that binds the guilty. Tim, however, could not contain himself. His voice cracked with fury. "You're insane. She's your daughter, Sandra. She's a child, not clay for you to twist, not some project for your sick ambitions." Sandra laughed, a sharp sound that echoed against the concrete walls, devoid of warmth. Insane? No, Tim. I'm the only one who sees clearly. The world rewards strength, obedience, perfection. And Blair... She resisted. She clung to softness, to weakness. So I had to teach her. I had to strip away every illusion and make her understand pain, hunger, discipline. Only through suffering could she become strong. You should be thanking me. She lifted the bat slightly, the fluorescent bulb catching its sheen. I saved her from becoming useless. My son stepped forward, placing himself between her and me instinctively, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "Where is she now?" he repeated, each word bitten off like a stone ground beneath his teeth. Sandra smiled again, tilting her head as though savoring his desperation. "Safe," she said cryptically. "For now. Unless you make me angry." She tapped the bat again, the sound rhythmic, menacing, each strike echoing like a countdown. I felt my body tremble, but I forced myself to speak, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Sandra, listen to me. You've already lost. Blair is home. She's safe. We know the truth. I gestured around the garage at the shadows and filth, at her weapon in hand. "This is the end of your masquerade. You can drop the act or you can make things worse for yourself. But either way, your time is finished." For the first time, the mask cracked. Her smile faltered, her eyes flickered with something darker than arrogance. Fear. She realized then what my words meant. Blair was gone from her reach. Whatever power she thought she still held had already slipped away. Rage consumed her, twisting her features, her knuckles whitening on the bat's handle. With a cry that was more animal than human, she lunged forward, swinging the weapon with brutal force. Time slowed. I remember the whoosh of air, the glint of metal. My son's arm lifting instinctively to block the blow. The impact rang out with a sickening thud as wood and bone collided, and Tim staggered back, pain etched across his face, but determination blazing in his eyes. He wrestled the bat from her grip, the struggle fierce, desperate, the two of them locked in a battle that felt less like husband and wife and more like predator and prey. I screamed, my voice echoing through the chamber, but I could do nothing except watch, my hands trembling, my heart breaking as the life I once believed whole was torn apart before me. Tim finally wrenched the bat from her, tossing it across the floor where it clattered and rolled into the shadows. He pinned her against the wall, his chest heaving, his voice low and filled with betrayal. "Why, Sandra? Why her? Why our little girl?" For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by Sandra's ragged breaths. Then she whispered, her words venomous even in defeat, "Because she was mine to break. And because you were too blind to see." The sound of approaching footsteps cut through the tension. From the entrance, the retired officers I had called for backup earlier stepped into the dim light, their presence solid, commanding. Sandra's eyes widened, realization dawning that there would be no escape, no clever words or manipulations left. They moved quickly, securing her hands with practiced efficiency, her struggles useless against their strength. Even as they dragged her away, she spat venom, promising vengeance, cursing us all, her voice echoing long after she'd been taken from sight. And then it was over. The silence that followed was deafening. My son slumped against the wall, his face pale, his arm bruised but not broken, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and grief. I moved to him, wrapping my arms around his shoulders, holding him as I had when he was a child. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. There were no words to capture the enormity of what had happened, of what we had discovered. In the days that followed, the truth spilled out like poison from a wound. Evidence was uncovered in the villa, records, belongings, traces of the life Blair had been forced to endure. Testimonies, confessions, undeniable proof that Sandra had orchestrated the abduction and torment of her own daughter. Her parents, horrified, distanced themselves, though whispers lingered of how much they had truly known. The courts moved swiftly, the law unrelenting. Sandra was sentenced, her once perfect image shattered into dust. But justice, though served, could not erase the scars. Blair remained quiet, withdrawn, haunted by nightmares that woke her in the night, her small body trembling as she clung to me or to her father. Therapy began, gentle voices coaxing her to heal, to remember that the world could be kind. There were moments of light, her laughter slowly returning, her eyes brightening when she played with Sebastian, her tentative steps toward reclaiming childhood. Yet there were also shadows that would never fully fade, scars invisible, yet eternal. For me, the ordeal carved itself into my soul. I had thought grief was the heaviest burden, but I learned that the weight of truth could be even greater. Still, I carried it willingly, for it was the truth that saved her, that restored her to us. And in the quiet moments when Blair's small hand slipped into mine, when she whispered, "Grandma," with trust in her voice once more, I knew that, despite all the pain, despite all the horror, love had endured. This is where the story ends, not with triumph, but with survival. We are not whole, but we are together. And that, in the end, is enough.